I take two. Okay.
Greg Burnham's interest in this case began almost immediately, since as a child he attended the services for JFK in Washington. Burnham appeared in the Guilty Men episode of the Man Who Killed Kennedy series on History Channel, where he discussed JFK's Vietnam withdrawal policy and JFK's intent to dismantle the CIA in his second term. He also appeared in the exhumation of Lee Harvey Oswald, the Norton Report on the Discovery Channel, and the infamous grave sites on the Travel Channel, Burnham also appeared in a documentary about the final disposition of JFK's casket, which was aired in 1999, concerning its having been dumped in the ocean in 1966. Burnham is also a founding member of the JFK Research Assassination Forum, and Burnham was the first guest on Leno Sanik's Black Op Radio, and has been also a guest on many radio stations, including KFI Radio in Los Angeles and Radio Liberty, among others, to discuss the JFK case. Greg Burnham.
Good afternoon, everybody. Earlier this year, I underwent a major surgery, thankfully from which I am now almost fully recovered. But last year, when John Judge and I first discussed my coming here to Dallas to speak about the 50th anniversary, I didn't yet know that I was going to have surgery to begin with, and I didn't realize how long it would take to recover. It's been a long haul. And it was only a few months ago that I knew that I'd be able physically to be capable of presenting more of my work. So thanks, John, for having me, and thanks, everybody, for attending. Originally, I was only going to give a long overdue presentation regarding the sabotaged Bay of Pigs invasion. Did I just say sabotaged? I sure did, and that wasn't a mistake. But on second thought, rather than offer up my analysis of an unsuccessful Cuba coup d'etat as though it had occurred in a vacuum, I instead decided to discuss a topic that would incorporate the Bay of Pigs in a manner more suited to the momentous occasion of the 50th anniversary of a successful American coup d'etat. This was much more challenging than presenting my thesis on the sabotaged Bay of Pigs invasion by itself, or for that matter, on Kennedy's strained relationship with his own military, or on his newly evolving civil rights policies. I might get emotional during this, or on the implications of his having offered an olive branch to Nikita Khrushchev, or on his decision to withdraw all troops and personnel from Vietnam by the end of '65. Each of these topics by themselves is worthy of more attention, but just not right now. Those who know me well and are familiar with my work were not terribly surprised to find out that I wasn't even slightly tempted to pursue a genealogical background check on one Lee Harvey Oswald, or to seek to positively identify the so-called three tramps, or definitively rule in or rule out a host of federal agencies, or otherwise engage in a parlor game called I Think I Know Who Done It. But less offensive than that last pursuit, but equally inadequate to this occasion, was the suggestion that I share new evidence of ongoing campaigns to obstruct justice that are still being carried out, both by agencies of the government and by prominent members of the media, some of whom claim to be earnest researchers. But I even passed on that and on them, and that wasn't easy. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America was born 237 years ago on the 4th of July, the same day that my daughter was born, in 1776, though. And 50 years later, on November 22nd, 63, it was murdered. It was 187 years old, 4 months and 18 days, and as far as nations go, it was just an infant. In his speech to the United Auto Workers of May 8th, 1962, John F. Kennedy quoted former President Harry Truman when he said, "There are 14 or 15 million Americans who have the resources to have representatives in Washington to protect their interests, and that the interests of the great mass of the other people, the 150 or 160 million, is the responsibility of the President of the United States, and I propose to fulfill it. In the post-World War II America of 1963, the viability of the executive branch of the United States government could have been appropriately defined by how well the above responsibility was met by the President. In order to fulfill his sworn oath to protect, preserve, and defend the Constitution, the President would necessarily take on the responsibility to safeguard the interests delineated in that portion of the Constitution most closely associated with personal freedom, the Bill of Rights. But there is a proper place for a federal government within the context of a democratic republic as laid out in our Constitution. Indeed, there is a necessity for it. Although such necessity is an inevitable consequence of maintaining a union, the undesirable side effects associated with it must be mitigated, else they will threaten to destroy the very liberty for which they were designed to preserve. And arguably, the environment most threatening to liberty exists during times of war, not solely due to the imminent threat of a hostile foreign government, but also because only then are patriotic citizens willing to sacrifice personal freedoms out of perceived necessity. Our founding fathers recognized these challenges to freedom as they were all too evident, because England would have succeeded in regaining control of the 13 colonies unless met with sufficient resistance. Our ability to organize our defenses in a unified manner through a federalization of forces was of paramount importance. And it was from that basic necessity for security that the federal government's existence derives. And it is through perpetration of such a need, now termed national security, that the federal government justifies its continued expansion to this every day. And by logical extension, the prospect of a sustained peace threatened to challenge that expansion in 1963, much as it does today. While it is true that the federal government has taken on countless additional responsibilities since its inception, it is also true that a great number of these are wholly self-serving and without any direct benefit to the interests of the great mass of the other people to whom John Kennedy promised his allegiance. Instead, they serve only the interests of the vast military-industrial complex's unholy union between the Department of Defense and corporate America. As a case in point, during the lame duck period just after Richard Nixon had lost the 1960 election, the CIA, as it is often wont to do, changed course from Eisenhower's plan for peace. This is most demonstrably seen by their having escalated the Bay of Pigs into a full-on amphibious assault and then placing Eisenhower's stamp of approval on it. Yet in an interview with Eisenhower following the Bay of Pigs, he stated unequivocally that he had approved of no such plan. John F. Kennedy inherited, in its then current form, a non-existent Eisenhower amphibious assault plan that had been hatched by the agency and sold to the new president under a fraudulent pretense. Following the Bay of Pigs, Kennedy recognized that he had been bamboozled and took the ship's helm by storm. The ship's course began to be righted, not at first, but gradually. Its captain, having gained sufficient experience, became bold. He refused to invade Cuba both during the Bay of Pigs and during the Cuban Missile Crisis. He pared back the CIA's power by signing National Security Action Memorandums 55, 56, and 57, making the Joint Chiefs of Staff directly responsible to the President for all Cold War operations, basically pulling the teeth of the CIA. He directed the federal government to intervene in states where the civil rights of minorities were most egregiously violated. He signed Executive Order 11110, extricating the United States from the death grip of debt imposed by the Federal Reserve, thus allowing money to be printed directly by the Treasury Department, interest-free. He took a giant leap toward peace during a speech at the American University, where for the first time, Americans were challenged not to view the Soviets as a threat, but rather to see the Russians as a people, and vice versa. And on October 11th, 1963, JFK solidified his commitment to peace by signing National Security Action Memorandum 263, ordering all personnel out of Vietnam by the end of '65. And finally, his determination to explore pursuits of mutual benefit with the Soviet Union, beneficial both to the United States and the Soviet Union, is displayed in National Security Action Memorandum 271 of November 12, in which JFK instructs NASA to cooperate with the Soviet Union in outer space matters and joint lunar landing projects. And 10 days later, the enemies of peace acted against him, and the winds of war prevailed. But like I said when I started, the 50th isn't about all that. It's much larger than all that. It's bigger than David Morales, David Atlee Phillips, William Harvey, anti-Castro Cubans, the Mafia, the Warren Commission, the Church Committee, the HSCA, CIA, FBI, NSA, and LBJ. It's bigger than questions surrounding the accuracy of the Mannlicher Carcano rifle, the marksmanship of the suspect, the exact number of shots fired, the changed motorcade route, the magic bullet theory, or the politics of Dallas Mayor Earl Cabell, whose brother General Charles Cabell was fired from the CIA by Kennedy following the Bay of Pigs. The 50th is bigger than questions surrounding the authenticity of the Zapruder film, and bigger than the failure of the Secret Service to protect their charge that day. Indeed, there was more security around Dealey Plaza today than there was 50 years ago. But this is bigger than that, too. The 50th is bigger than H.L. Hunt, Richard Nixon, Clint Murchison, and James Jesus Angleton. It's bigger than Gerald Posner, Bill O'Reilly, Vince Bugliosi, John McAdams, Magda Hassan, David Guyat, Gary Mack, and all the rest of them, and those of their ilk. It's bigger than Vietnam. It's bigger than the Cold War. Indeed, the significance of this anniversary is bigger than both the conspiracy to assassinate John Fitzgerald Kennedy and the conspiracy to cover it up combined. For me, today is not the 50th anniversary of JFK's being murdered at the hands of conspirators, though murdered he was, nor is it about the injustice by which the perpetrators enjoyed impunity, courtesy of a well-orchestrated high-level cover-up. Rather, I am here 50 years later to memorialize that day when a government of, by, and for we the people failed to endure. And I'm here to grieve that failure. The success of a democratic republic such as ours depends on the Founding Fathers' concept of three distinct and separate, fully functional branches of government. When one of those branches is rendered impotent, relegated to a position of inferiority, or as in this case, effectively disemboweled, then the system upon which such a republic was anchored will drift aimlessly, directed by the tides and the wind, until someone or something retakes the helm. But since 1963, the helm has been left unclaimed by whoever has occupied the Oval Office. And under the circumstances, you can hardly blame them. But all too often, in the absence of such leadership, the something that has ended up taking over has been war and the war machine. I cannot speak for all researchers, only for myself, and perhaps for some of us who recall John F. Kennedy's words that cold winter day in January of 1961, instructing us to ask ourselves, what can we do for our country? Some of us believe the answer is demonstrated by our commitment to hold government accountable to we the people, as our Constitution informs us is not only our right, but also is our duty. But we are challenged to find a way by which to accomplish it, one that is historically significant, personally meaningful to each of us, responsive to the needs of our fellow citizens, worth passing on to our children and future generations, all the while preventing the positive elements of government, of which many still remain, from perishing. Thomas Paine said, "An army of principles can penetrate where an army of soldiers cannot." What must be accomplished need not be done at the expense of irresponsibility, resulting in riots, lawlessness, or civil war. In short, I'm certainly not seeking revenge. I'm not even seeking justice anymore. There is a plaque at CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia, that quotes the words of St. John, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." What I seek is truth and the freedom that accompanies it. Absent the truth, freedom's only hope is through a revolution of mind. I want to move on to the Bay of Pigs now, but thank you for indulging me. So how does JFK and the sabotaged Bay of Pigs figure into all of this? There's been a great myth. Everybody's heard it over and over and over again. The Bay of Pigs failed because JFK broke a promise. He broke a promise to provide air support, air cover for Brigade 2506. And we know that this is a myth for a number of different reasons, but let me kind of cut to the documents, if I might. Did Kennedy promise direct U.S. military intervention if necessary in the form of jet air cover? And if so, did he actually break the promise? Next slide, please. First of all, we have to ask ourselves the question, did he have the authority to do such a thing? Could the president have ordered, while bound by the prohibitions of National Security Directive 5412/2, could he have ordered U.S. Navy jets to provide air cover, particularly from the USS Essex that was standing by? The answer is unequivocally no, for a number of reasons. One reason is it just was not the right thing to do, right? But the second reason is this was a CIA covert operation, so by definition, you don't involve military. You maintain plausible deniability. But who hatched the idea? Was this a Kennedy idea? We all know that it wasn't. It started in the Eisenhower years. And during the lame duck period, what happened? It got escalated very, very quickly. But if we read from the record, thanks, Randy. If we read from the record, from its inception, the plan had been developed under the ground rule that it must retain a covert character, okay? At the end it says, the ground rule meant, among other things, that no U.S. military forces or individuals could take part in combat operations. So that's pretty clear right there. If you move on to the next document, we also know that 4 days before the invasion, the project chief, J.C. King, sent an emergency cable to Puerto Cabezas, Nicaragua, where the Brigade 2506 was going to be launching from. We had B-26 bombers, 16 of them down there, that were going to be flown by the pilots of the anti-Castro Cuban force. And the cable reads, please, and by the way, this was to Colonel Jack Hawkins. It says, at A, please advise emergency precedents if your experience during the last few days have in any way changed your evaluation of the brigade. And B, for your information, the president has stated that under no conditions will U.S. intervene with any U.S. forces. This is 4 days before the invasion. Colonel Hawkins replies the same day in a cable, and I'll get to that portion of it, but let me start with this. He says, my observations the last few days have increased my confidence in the ability of this force to accomplish not only initial combat missions, but also the ultimate objective of Castro's overthrow. That's just about as positive as you can get. And he goes on in the next few paragraphs to delineate exactly why he is so confident that they will be able to do this. On the next page, he goes as far as to say the brigade is well organized and is more heavily armed and better equipped in some respects than U.S. infantry units. And in the next paragraph, he goes on to say, Lieutenant Colonel George Gaines, U.S. Air Force, informed me today that he considers the B-26 squadron equal to the best U.S. Air Force squadron. So this is not a bunch of ragtag people going to try to do a nighttime thing and not get caught. This is a pretty formidable group of people, according to Colonel Jack Hawkins. And then finally, F, it says, the brigade officers do not expect help from U.S. armed forces. So Kennedy has informed them that he's not going to do it, and Hawkins has gone back and said, and they know you're not going to offer any assistance. Okay? That's what a covert mission is. Next slide, please. Did the anti-Castro Cubans expect direct intervention by the armed forces, and do they harbor hatred towards JFK for not providing it? Interesting question, because it's twofold. The first one I think we've kind of eliminated. It looks very much like there never was a promise at all, officially, okay? And it was reported back that they didn't expect it. But could it be, I thought, was there a rhetoric? Maybe Kennedy in a news conference or something made statements that led them to believe this, so in the back of their heads, they always thought he'd come to the rescue. But next slide, you'll see that that's just not the case. 5 days before D-Day, at a press conference of April 12, President Kennedy was asked, and I quote, how far would the U.S. go to help an uprising against Castro? And Kennedy's answer is, first, I want to say that there will not be, under any conditions, an intervention in Cuba by the United States Armed Forces. So this isn't something that they got off the airwaves, okay? They got it from somewhere, though. I think somebody said the letters of some agency here earlier that might be somehow responsible for this impression. If you go to the next slide, folks, yes, Gary. Yeah, but that memorandum is to Maxwell Taylor from the Cuban Study Group, but it is referencing a cable that went out on April 13th. Okay? Everybody with me on that? I don't make those kind of mistakes, Gary. I'm not a doctor. No, I'm kidding. Thank you very much. No. The memorandum to the Cuban Study Group that went to Maxwell Taylor happened obviously after the invasion was over. So when Kennedy, which is I'm getting to right here, Kennedy appointed the Cuban Study Group, and everyone involved in it had to report to the Cuban Study Group. So one of the things that was reported was this cable was uncovered that was sent on the 13th of April before the invasion, but the date of the memorandum, like Gary pointed out, was the 26th. So the Cuban Study Group consisted of 4 people: General Maxwell Taylor, highly decorated, highly celebrated officer who had retired. Kennedy brought him out of retirement. He didn't have a dog in the fight, right? He wasn't even technically in the military at the time that this happened. He is very familiar with these types of operations, or at least operations. I don't think there was ever an operation quite like this one. Allen Dulles, DCI, had to be involved with this. The Chief of Naval Operations, Arleigh Burke, was in support, far off the coast of Cuba, not that far off, but there for support purposes. And of course, the president's brother, Robert Kennedy. The document that you're looking at there, the top of it, it says the immediate cause of failure of Operation Zapata. And it goes through a list of various things that contributed heavily to the failure, ultimate failure of the operation. But of all of them, listed in item number 8, when we get there, it says the effectiveness of the Castro Air Force over the beach resulted from a failure to destroy the airplanes on the ground before or concurrently with the landing. And further down in number 8, it says, the cancellation of the airstrikes planned at dawn on D-Day, the last mentioned was probably the most serious, as it eliminated the last favorable opportunity to destroy the Castro Air Force on the ground. And it goes on to say at the bottom, finally, there was the failure to convey the issue to the president when the opportunity was presented and explained to him with proper force the probable, excuse me, my eyesight is going, military consequences of a last-minute cancellation. Next slide, please. So what happened was, initially what the plan was, the State Department was afraid of having airstrikes into Cuba because they want the United States to always look innocent and everything. And the military said if we don't control the air and Castro gets his planes off the ground, they'll be sitting ducks. So the CIA came up with a plan to accommodate both sides. If we're gonna get control of the air, we need to eliminate everything on the ground, so we'll fake it. We'll have some of the B-26s from Puerto Cabezas hit as many planes on the ground as they can 2 days prior to D-Day, hopefully get them all, they probably won't, but hopefully get as many as they can, then fly out of there, land over Miami, have one of them hop out of the plane, it'll look like it's a Castro Air Force plane, he'll claim he's defecting from Castro, and that he blew up as much stuff as he could on his way out. Sounded like a good CIA plan. So they knocked out a whole bunch of stuff, right? There was 10 T-33s, maybe 11. They knocked 7 of those out. There were 3 or 4 remaining. A couple of Sea Furies they knocked out. A couple of those were left. I think they knocked out a Lodestar as well. A couple of B-26s, right? But T-33s are maneuverable jets. So are Sea Furies. They're not jets, but they're very maneuverable. B-26s are not maneuverable. Prouty's office is the one who outfitted them with 8 50 caliber machine guns in their noses. So when this guy lands and claims this, well, next slide, please. Castro at the UN screaming at Stevenson. He's saying, are you kidding me right now? This isn't my plane. My planes have plexiglass noses. They don't have opaque noses like that. I don't have 50 caliber guns, and the markings are wrong. So Stevenson's not even been read in on the mission. He doesn't even know what's going on, so he denies it vehemently. Turns out, when he's faced with the evidence, that he was wrong. So he either looks incompetent, not trusted by the administration because he's not in the loop, or he's just lying. Any way you cut it, he doesn't look good. So he gets upset, to say the least. He gets on the phone with his boss, Rusk, and over the next 24 hours, he prevails on Rusk to order the cancellation of the D-Day strikes that were supposed to take out the remainder of Castro's Air Force while they were on the ground. That was always a part of this, okay? So Rusk goes for it. He calls George McBundy. George McBundy, McGeorge Bundy, I say it wrong sometimes. My friend Phil Dragoo says McBoy George Bundy. But so Bundy calls Cabell on the phone and tells him to cancel the strikes. Cabell, are you kidding me? This is essential. Bundy says, Cabell, if you want to take it up with somebody, you have to take it up with Rusk. Cabell calls Rusk, if you go to the next slide, please. Now, when the Cuban Study Group met, as we were talking before, they had to, everybody submitted memoranda of what went wrong, what happened, and then they also got grilled by the 4 people on the committee, okay? So very interesting that Cabell called Bissell and said, hey, let's go over to Rusk's. He calls Rusk up on the phone, says, can I go to the office? So they all meet at the office, right? And Cabell and Bissell, in their own words, and they both signed off on this, say the following. Next slide, please. So I'm going to ask a question first, and then I'm going to answer it with their answers, and they were no Kennedy lovers. Did the president cancel the D-Day airstrikes? The answer is no. At about 9:30 p.m. on 16 April, Mr. McGeorge Bundy, Special Assistant to the President, telephoned General Cabell of the CIA to inform him that dawn airstrikes the following morning should not be launched until they could be conducted from a strip within the beachhead, et cetera. Okay? Next slide.
Who was that earlier following flight? Where did that originate from?
The original one, I'm not positive.
Florida or something?
Well, I think it originated in Nicaragua, but then it landed in Florida.
Right.
That's my understanding. Thank you. Okay? So, but the most important part of it is that it landed in Florida. When the president was made aware that the cancellation of the airstrike was being considered, and he was not made aware, how do we know? Again, this is from their own words. It's also in the Foreign Relations of the United States, but in their own document, Cabell and Bissell say this. The Secretary of State indicated subsequently that Cabell and Bissell's presentation led him to feel that while the airstrikes were indeed important, that they were not vital. However, he offered them the privilege of telephoning the president in order to present their views to him, and they saw no point in doing that. So Kennedy was left out of the loop. So next slide, we've got Bissell and Cabell, and we've got Rusk, and between the 3 of them, for all I know, they sat around and played poker that night, drank some martinis, had some cigars, and said, gee, do you think that he'll cave tomorrow morning when he sees those guys dying on the beach? Think maybe we can get him to break NSC 5412? He's a young president. He's only been in there for a few months. Just want to comment real quick. Another example, you know, the thing that really bothers me is this information is available. Anybody who wants it, you can find it. You can figure it out for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But you can go anywhere and you can look at almost anything on the internet. You can go from Britannica, which I've done, to Wikipedia, which I've done, to wherever you'd like to go. 1 minute. And you'll notice that you'll find the same drivel over and over again, that it failed because Kennedy broke a promise. In November of 1984, Dr. Jack B. Pfeiffer, former chief of the CIA's history staff, unsuccessfully attempted to get his manuscript titled The Taylor Committee Investigation of the Bay of Pigs declassified. It just got declassified 2 years ago, July, over 50 years later. And in it, he says, next slide, once again, the reader, next slide. Thank you, sir. Once again, the reader is reminded of the comments which General Cobb made to the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, during the course of the 16 April discussion. Did anybody recall him having Kennedy on the phone while Cabell is communicating to him the necessity here? No, because it didn't happen. Okay, this is an over 320-page report by Pfeiffer, and he's repeating the same lie that was repeated earlier. The only time that anybody was on the phone with Kennedy in Rusk's office was the next morning at 4:30 a.m. of the 17th. Now, Cabell goes to Rusk's home, Rusk gets the president on the phone, and they try to get jets from the USS Essex. That's a different story. What are you going to do? Pretend they're anti-Castro Cubans in F-4s or something? Okay, that's not going to work. And General Maxwell Taylor confirms it, but I think I'm out of time, so if you go to the next slide, you all can just kind of read that for yourselves. And I'll say two real quick things. One more slide, please. I always said to myself, you know, I understood why Dulles was forced to retire and why Bissell and Cabell were forced to resign, right? Cabell and Bissell did not communicate to Rusk with enough intensity, and they passed up the chance to ask the president. They deserved to get fired. But what happened to Bundy in this? Why was he not fired? Turns out he offered his letter of resignation. He didn't put his picture on it like I did, but he offered his letter of resignation, and he apologized for how he served the president during the Castro situation. Kennedy must have tucked it into a drawer and didn't exercise it. And just last week, I checked Wikipedia's account of the Bay of Pigs, and here's what it said. Late on 16 April, President Kennedy ordered cancellation of further airfield strikes planned for dawn on 17 April to attempt plausible deniability of U.S. direct involvement. There it is in Wikipedia, the place where most American goes for their information, unfortunately. And guess what? You want to know who wrote that? Mr. Peter Kornbluh, the director of the Cuban director of the Cuba Documentation Project for the National Security Archives, in his book, Bay of Pigs Declassified, the secret CIA report on the invasion of Cuba. Even he's got it wrong. Thank you for your time. Topic that would incorporate the Bay of Pigs in a manner more suited to the momentous occasion of the 50th anniversary of a successful American coup d'etat. This was much more challenging than presenting my thesis on the sabotaged Bay of Pigs invasion by itself, or for that matter, on Kennedy's strained relationship with his own military, or on his newly evolving civil rights policies. I might get emotional during this, or on the implications of his having offered an olive branch to Nikita Khrushchev, or on his decision to withdraw all troops and personnel from Vietnam by the end of '65. Each of these topics by themselves is worthy of more attention, but just not right now. Those who know me well and are familiar with my work were not terribly surprised to find out that I wasn't even slightly tempted to pursue a genealogical background check on one Lee Harvey Oswald, or to seek to positively identify the so-called three tramps, or definitively rule in or rule out a host of federal agencies, or otherwise engage in a parlor game called I Think I Know Who Done It. But less offensive than that last pursuit, but equally inadequate to this occasion, was the suggestion that I share new evidence of ongoing campaigns to obstruct justice that are still being carried out, both by agencies of the government and by prominent members of the media, some of whom claim to be earnest researchers. But I even passed on that and on them, and that wasn't easy. But you see, ladies and gentlemen, the United States of America was born 237 years ago on the 4th of July, the same day that my daughter was born, in 1776 though. And 50 years later, on November 22nd, '63, it was murdered. It was 187 years of major surgery, thankfully from which I am now almost fully recovered. But last year when John Judge and I first discussed my coming here to Dallas to speak about the 50th anniversary, I didn't yet know that I was going to have surgery to begin with, and I didn't realize how long it would take to recover. It's been a long haul. And it was only a few months ago that I knew that I'd be able physically to be capable of presenting more of my work. So thanks, John, for having me, and thanks, everybody, for attending. Originally, I was only going to give a long overdue presentation regarding the sabotaged Bay of Pigs invasion. Did I just say sabotaged? I sure did, and that wasn't a mistake. But on second thought, rather than offer up my analysis of an unsuccessful Cuba coup d'etat as though it had occurred in a vacuum, I instead decided to discuss it.
The Norton report on the Discovery Channel and the infamous grave sites on the Travel Channel, Burnham also appeared in a documentary about the final disposition of JFK's casket, which was aired in 1999 concerning its having been dumped in the ocean in 1966. Burnham is also a founding member of the JFK Research Assassination Forum, and Burnham was the first guest on Leno Sanik's Black Op Radio, and has been also a guest on many radio stations, including KFI Radio in Los Angeles and Radio Liberty, among others, to discuss the JFK case. Greg Burnham.
Good afternoon, everybody. Earlier this year, I underwent a
I take two. Okay.
Greg Burnham's interest in this case began almost immediately, since, as a child, he attended the services for JFK in Washington. Burnham appeared in the Guilty Men episode of the Man Who Killed Kennedy series on History Channel, where he discussed JFK's Vietnam withdrawal policy and JFK's intent to dismantle the CIA in his second term. He also appeared in the exhumation of Lee Harvey Oswald